All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome in.
Yeah.
Today, we are diving deep into something I know a lot of you are thinking about: IELTS scores and how to improve them. I mean, whether you're just getting started with prep or you're looking for that final boost to, make it into that dream uni or land a great job or even sort out some immigration stuff, this is definitely for you.
Totally. IELTS, or the International English Language Testing System, if we're being official about it, it's a pretty big deal for people all over the world, right? It's kind of like this essential proof of your English skills, which can open so many doors to education, to careers, to, like you said, all sorts of new opportunities.
Exactly. It's your ticket to a lot of things.
Yeah. And just a quick reminder for anyone who's new to this, the IELTS score you get is called a band score.
Right.
And it goes from 1 to 9, basically showing how good your English is.
Okay, so with that in mind, in this deep dive, our mission is pretty simple. We want to give you the tools, the strategies, the real practical stuff you need to do well in every single part of the IELTS. We're talking listening, reading, writing, speaking, the whole shebang.
The whole 9 yards.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's get this show on the road. First things first, what does the IELTS exam actually look like? What are we dealing with here?
Okay, so there are 4 main parts to the IELTS. First up, you've got listening. That takes about 30 minutes and has 40 questions. And here's the thing. They throw different accents at you. You might hear British English, American English, Australian, even Canadian.
Wow, so you really have to be ready for anything.
You really do. Then you move on to reading, which lasts an hour and has 3 long passages with another 40 questions. Writing also takes an hour, and this one has 2 tasks.
Okay, so 2 separate things to write within that hour.
Yeah, exactly. For the academic test, you'll be summarizing stuff like graphs or charts and then writing an essay. But if you're taking the general training test, you'll write a letter. It could be formal or informal, depending on what they ask for, and then also an essay.
And then finally, we have the speaking part.
Right. Speaking is the shortest section. It's only between 11 and 14 minutes, and it's broken down to 3 parts. First, there's a little interview, then you get a cue card with the topic and points you need to talk about, and finally there's a discussion related to that cue card topic.
Okay, so that's the basic layout of the exam. But, it's easy to say. It all sounds pretty straightforward when you're just describing it like that. What are some of the common mistakes you see people making when they're preparing for the IELTS? What are the things that trip people up?
Oh, there are definitely some common pitfalls. One of the biggest ones is simply not really understanding the format of each section. People underestimate how strict the timing is or the specific types of questions they'll get. Another common mistake. A lot of people get super focused on one area they feel good about, like say they love reading, so they only practice reading, and then totally neglect stuff like listening or speaking, which might be weaker areas for them.
Yeah, it's easy to fall into that trap.
It is. And then there's this myth, I guess you could call it, that if you just use really fancy vocabulary, you're guaranteed a high score. But that's not really how it works.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's got to be more to it than just big words.
Way more. While a strong vocabulary is helpful, it's not the only thing that matters. Clear communication and good grammar are just as, if not more, important.
Right. You need to actually be understood.
Exactly. And then lastly, bad time management across all the sections. That can really sink your score, even if you know the material well.
That makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like, you were saying before that it's not just about knowing English really well, it's also about knowing the test itself, how it works, and then practicing the right way.
Absolutely. To do well in the IELTS, you need a combo of things. Being good at English, knowing the test inside and out, having good strategies, managing your time, and practicing consistently.
Got it. So strategy is key. All right, let's break down some specific tips, starting with listening. I know a lot of people find that part really tricky, especially with all those different accents thrown into the mix. What are some concrete things you can do to really train your ear to pick up on those different ways of speaking?
That's a huge challenge for a lot of people. The fact that the listening section uses various accents means you got to actively expose yourself to them beforehand. One super practical way is to listen to podcasts and news from different sources. Think BBC for British English, ABC in Australia, and NPR for American English. You can even find stuff from Canada. The more you get used to those different rhythms and pronunciations, the less likely you are to get thrown off during the test.
So it's like getting your brain familiar with all those different sounds of English.
Yeah, exactly. It's like training your ear to hear different musical scales.
I like that analogy. So what about actively improving your understanding when you're listening to something in English? What are some good techniques for that?
active listening is super important here. A good way to start is by using subtitles when you're watching something. That helps you connect the sounds with the written words. As you feel more comfortable, try ditching the subtitles and just listening. This forces your brain to rely only on what it's hearing.
Okay, so that's pushing yourself a bit further.
Right. And then there's something called shadow listening, which can be really helpful.
Shadow listening, what's that?
It's basically repeating what you hear as you hear it, almost like an echo. This not only makes you process the sounds more, which helps with understanding, but it also helps with pronunciation and intonation. It's like training your mouth to make the same sounds you're hearing.
That's really clever. So you're not just listening passively, you're actively engaging with the words.
Exactly.
Now let's talk note-taking, because during the actual listening test, you have to be able to take good notes without missing what's being said, right? Any tips on how to do that effectively?
Oh, for sure. Note-taking can make a huge difference in the listening section. The trick is to be super concise. Don't try to write down every single word. Focus on the keywords, the words that carry the most important information.
So how do you figure out what those keywords are?
Think about the kind of question being asked. If it's about dates or numbers, those are your keywords. If it's about opinions, look for those adjectives and adverbs that tell you how someone feels. And practice noticing those little words and phrases that signal a shift in topic. Like however, or on the other hand. Those can help you predict what keywords are coming next.
So it's like being one step ahead.
Yeah. And don't forget abbreviations and symbols. GODAF for government, an arrow pointing up for increase, stuff like that. Develop your own shorthand.
Great tips. Now, are there any common traps that the IELTS examiners set in the listening section? Like things they do to try and trick you?
Oh, yeah, definitely. They love throwing in wrong information right before the right answer just to see if you're really paying attention.
Oh, sneaky.
Right. So you might hear one thing and then boom, they contradict it or change it up completely. So don't just grab onto the first thing you hear. Wait and make sure you've got the full picture.
You've got to be listening critically, not just passively.
Right. And also watch out for synonyms. They might use a word like cheap in the beginning, but then the answer uses affordable instead. So you need to be focused and ready for those kinds of changes in language.
Right. It's like being a detective and sorting through all the clues to find the right one.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to reading. I think time is the biggest stress factor for people in this section.
Oh, without a doubt. Many people struggle to get through all those passages and answer every question in just an hour. And I think that often comes down to dealing with difficult vocabulary and tricky question wording.
So how do you tackle that time pressure? What are some strategies that can help people read and answer questions more efficiently?
Skimming and scanning are your best friends here. Skimming means quickly reading through the passage to get the main idea. You're not trying to understand every detail at this point.
Okay, so just getting the gist of it.
Exactly. A good tip for skimming is to pay attention to the first and last sentences of each paragraph because they often summarize the main point. Then you have scanning, which is when you're hunting for specific information, like a name, a date, a specific word, whatever the question is asking for.
So skimming for the big picture and scanning for specific details.
Exactly. Think of it like when you're looking for a particular ingredient in a huge grocery store, you don't read every label on every shelf, right? You scan for the thing you need. But then when you're just trying to get a sense of where things are in the store, you skim, you glance around to get the general layout.
That makes total sense. Now, what about the different types of questions in the reading section? Any special strategies for those?
Absolutely. It's really important to know the different question types and how to approach them. For those true, false, not given questions, you have to be super careful about the difference between false and not given. False means the passage directly contradicts the statement, while not given means the information just isn't there at all. It's not saying it's true or false, it's just not mentioned.
That's where people get tripped up.
Yeah. Then, for matching headings questions, remember that trick I mentioned about reading the first and last sentences of each paragraph. That's super helpful here. And finally, for multiple choice questions, always try to eliminate the obviously wrong options before picking your answer.
Great strategies. So, outside of doing practice tests, what are some things people can do to improve their reading speed in general, like in their daily lives?
Regular reading is key. Make it a habit to read things in English every day. Newspapers, articles, whatever you find interesting. And don't just stick to one type of stuff. The more variety you have, the better you'll get at understanding different writing styles and building your vocabulary.
So just make reading a part of your routine.
Exactly. And when you're practicing, always time yourself. This helps you get used to working under pressure. And another important thing, you don't have to understand every single word to answer the questions. Seriously. Focus on those key words, the main ideas, and use the context to figure out what things mean. And here's a golden rule. Don't get stuck on one hard question. If you're spending way too much time on it, make a guess, mark it, and move on. You can always come back to it later if you have time.
Excellent advice. Okay, let's move on to the writing section. This is where a lot of people start to feel, well, a little terrified. Can you walk us through those two different writing tasks?
Of course. In IELTS writing, you have 1 hour to do 2 tasks. Task 1 depends on whether you're doing academic or general training.
Right.
If it's academic, you'll get some visual information like a graph or a chart, and you have to summarize it, describe the trends, make comparisons, that kind of thing. It's all about showing that you can understand and present data in a clear way.
Okay, so pretty analytical.
Yeah, very much so. But for general training, task 1 is all about writing a letter. It could be formal or informal, depending on what they give you. It's about showing you can communicate effectively in writing for a specific purpose and audience.
So whether it's analyzing data or writing a letter, what's the most important thing to keep in mind for task 1?
Structure. And clarity, of course. For academic task 1, you usually start with an introduction where you paraphrase what the question is asking. Then you give an overview of the main trends or the big picture shown in the visual. And then in the body paragraphs, you go into detail, making comparisons and backing up your points with data.
Okay, so it's like telling a story with the data.
That's a great way to put it. And for the general training letter, you need to be crystal clear about why you're writing that letter. Is it to ask for something, to complain, to invite someone, who you're writing to, and all the specific information you need to include? And don't forget about the tone. A formal letter needs a formal tone, an informal letter needs an informal tone.
Makes sense. All right, and we have writing task 2, the essay, which is the same for both academic and general training, right?
Yep, that's right. Task 2 is all about the essay, no matter which test you're taking. They'll give you a statement or question about a general topic, and you need to give your opinion, discuss different sides, or maybe even propose solutions.
So it really tests your ability to think critically and express yourself in writing.
Absolutely. There are a few common types of essays. There's the opinion essay, where you state your viewpoint and back it up with reasons and examples. Then there's the discussion essay, where you explore both sides of an argument. There's also the problem-solution essay, where you identify a problem and suggest solutions. And then there's the advantage-disadvantage essay, where you weigh the pros and cons of something.
So, a lot of different ways to approach it. Is there a good basic structure to follow no matter what type of essay you're writing?
Definitely. You want to start with an introduction that does 2 things. It paraphrases the question and states your main argument or thesis statement. Then you have several body paragraphs, each one focusing on a single main idea that supports your thesis. Make sure to include example and explanations in each body paragraph.
So you're basically building your argument piece by piece.
Yep, exactly. And then you end with a conclusion that sums up your main points and restates your thesis in a slightly different way. No new information in the conclusion, just a nice wrap-up.
Got it. So, in terms of the writing itself, what are some common mistakes you see people making that can lower their score?
One big one is not following the word count. They give you a suggested range, and going way over or under that can hurt your score. For task 2, that's usually around 250 words.
So it's about finding that sweet spot.
Right. And another common issue is using the same words over and over again. You want to show that you have a wide vocabulary, so use synonyms, use different grammatical structures, mix things up a bit.
So variety is key.
It really is. And perhaps the most important thing is how you organize your ideas. The examiners are looking for clear, logical writing. Your argument needs to flow. Even if you have great grammar and vocabulary, if your essay is all over the place, it's not going to score well.
Makes sense. So make it easy for the reader to follow your train of thought.
Exactly. Use topic sentences at the beginning of each paragraph to introduce your main ideas. And use linking words and phrases to connect your ideas and make those transitions smooth.
Great advice. Okay, let's move on to what can be the most nerve-wracking part for many. The speaking test. It's face-to-face, which could be pretty intimidating for some people. Can you break down the format of the speaking test and what each part involves?
For sure. And yeah, it can be a bit daunting to think about speaking to an examiner, but remember, it's also your chance to really show off how well you can communicate in English. The speaking test has 3 parts. Part 1 is pretty basic. It's just an introduction and some personal questions about things like your hobbies, your city, your work or studies, things like that.
Okay, so the getting to know you stage.
Exactly. Then Part 2 is where things get a bit more challenging. This is the cue card task. You get a card with a topic and some points to talk about. You have 1 minute to prepare, and then you have to speak for about 2 minutes on that topic.
Ah, yes, the dreaded cue card.
It can be a little scary, but we'll give you some tips to tackle it. And then finally, Part 3 is a discussion based on the topic you talked about in Part 2. The questions in this part are usually more abstract, and they want you to give your opinions and thoughts in a more analytical way.
Okay, so they're really pushing you to think on your feet and express yourself in more complex ways. So any tips on how to sound fluent and natural during the speaking test? It's easy to fall into that trap of sounding like you're reciting a memorized script.
Oh, that's a big no-no. The examiners can spot those memorized answers from a mile away, and it won't do you any favors. They want to hear you speak naturally, like you would in a real conversation. So first of all, ditch the script.
Throw it away.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to use those little filler phrases, like, "That's an interesting question," or "Let me think about that for a second." Those give you a moment to gather your thoughts, and they make you sound more natural.
Right, like you're actually having a conversation.
Exactly, and make an effort to speak in full sentences whenever possible. Short, one-word answers won't get you very far.
They want to see you can actually put sentences together and express yourself clearly.
Precisely.
Now, about that cue card. That 1 minute of preparation time can feel like forever and no time at all at the same time. What's your advice for making the most of that time and structuring your thoughts effectively?
It's a tricky one, for sure. Here's a method that can really help. When you get your card, quickly jot down some notes using the who, what, when, where, why, how approach. Just think about each of those questions in relation to the topic on the card.
So you're making sure you cover all the bases.
Exactly. It's a quick way to make sure you got enough to talk about for the full 2 minutes. And if it works for the topic, don't be shy about throwing in a personal story or experience. That can make your answer more engaging and sound more authentic.
Great tip. Okay, last question about the speaking test. What's the best mindset to have going into it? It's easy to get flustered if you feel like you've made a mistake. Any words of wisdom?
It's so important to remember that everyone makes mistakes when they speak, even native English speakers. You might stumble over a word, or you might make a little grammar error. It happens. The examiners understand that. What they're really looking for is how well you can communicate your ideas overall. They're listening to your fluency, how your ideas connect, your vocabulary, your grammar. But they're not expecting perfection. If you do make a mistake, just correct yourself naturally and keep going. Don't let it throw you off. The most important thing is to speak clearly and confidently and express yourself the best you can. They want to see how you use English in a real-time situation.
That's really reassuring to hear. So it's about the big picture, not the tiny little slips.
Exactly. Focus on communicating your message effectively.
Awesome. Okay, let's take a moment to recap all this amazing advice. It's been a lot of information.
It has. So for listening, remember to expose yourself to different accents. Be an active listener. Practice taking good notes using keywords and abbreviations, and watch out for those tricky moments where the examiners might try to throw you off.
Right. Be alert.
For reading, focus on skimming and scanning, understand the different question types, and work on your speed by reading consistently and focusing on keywords and context. Don't get bogged down by every single word.
And remember, time is of the essence in that section.
Exactly. For writing, structure is your best friend. Follow those outlines we talked about for Task 1 and Task 2. Stay within the word count, use lots of different vocabulary, and make sure your ideas flow logically.
Okay, so it's all about clarity and organization.
Definitely. And finally, for speaking, be natural, don't memorize answers, use filler phrases, speak in full sentences, and use that who, what, when, where, why, how technique for the cue card. And most importantly, don't let little mistakes get you down.
Just keep talking.
Exactly. Show them what you can do.
And throughout all of this, the golden rule is
practice, practice, practice. Make it a part of your daily routine. Even short bursts of focused practice can make a big difference over time.
Consistency is key. Well, to all you listeners out there, we really hope this deep dive has given you some useful strategies and a boost of confidence as you get ready for your IELTS. Remember, you can totally achieve the score you want if you've got the right approach and you put in the effort. And if you found this helpful, go explore more IELTS resources out there. There's a ton of great stuff available to help you keep learning and improving. Who knows what language learning adventures will go on next time?